RMA, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Joining me now from the Sky News Centre is Liberal MP David Coleman and the Shadow Assistant Health Minister Stephen Jones. Thank you both very much for joining us on Lunchtime Agenda. First to you, David Coleman. Is there a case to up the excise on petrol?
Oh, well, look, obviously, David, I don't want to preempt anything that's going to be in the budget, but what's important to understand is the context that the government finds itself in because of the financial mismanagement of Labor. We've gone from $50 billion in the bank when Labor came in to net debt of over $200 billion, heading up towards $2/3 of a trillion within a decade if we don't do something about it. So
would the fuel excise be a reasonable way to claw back some of that lost revenue?
Well, look, obviously the government needs to look at a wide range of options. That's what a sensible government does in this sort of situation. We've got a very serious fiscal imbalance. We're not going to fail to address it. We are going to address those very serious issues, and obviously we're looking at a number of different ways of addressing the problem.
Stephen Jones, the petrol excise, as we heard in that earlier interview, has not gone up in line with inflation. It's been pegged at 38 cents, and that's seen some $25 billion over the last decade lost in government revenue. Would you support a shift to it being linked to CPI in the future?
Economists argue that it should never have been changed by the Howard government almost a decade ago now. You might find it a bit easier to accept had the government not spent the most part of the last 4 years campaigning hysterically against an energy tax. And indeed, in their first budget, the first opportunity they get to do something, what do? Put in place, or propose to put in place, a Bowser tax. It's a broken promise, pure and simple. There is nothing that the government knows about the state of the budget today that they didn't know about prior to the August election. If they intended to do it, they should have told the Australian people that that's what they intended to do.
Do you agree with your colleague Bernie Ripoll that the government should drop the assistance given to the mining industry, for example, through diesel subsidies before it touches the petrol tax?
Well, these are matters to be debated and decided by the Shadow Cabinet, but I would make this point. It does stand out as an area that warrants discussion and debate.
And sorry, David, if I could just pick up on Stephen's point about the so-called hysterical approach on the energy tax. I mean, the carbon tax is hurting families in my electorate very substantially. And
wait till they get your Bowser tax, mate.
And
they'll be cheering for that.
And we are absolutely committed to repealing it and looking forward to the new Senate hopefully taking a more constructive attitude than the one that Labor will dominate until the 30th of June.
What about the diesel subsidies? Do you believe, David Coleman, that they should be revisited? It seems the government has ruled out doing that, so that means the big mining companies and other big companies won't lose those government subsidies, but it seems everyday Australians will be slugged at the pump.
Oh, look, as I said, David, I don't want to preempt particular outcomes from the budget process. We've got a really serious situation. We need to consider a wide range of options. And of course, as you know, every year around this time, there's a flurry of stories about what may or may not be happening. But we will have the full detail in just 5 days' time. And I think that's when we can have a very constructive discussion about the steps we've taken.
The other big issue, of course, is the debt tax, which has now been locked in by Cabinet. It will feature in Tuesday's budget. Now, I don't want to go over so much whether or not it's a broken promise because, let's be frank, it is a broken promise. But let's just look at the merits of the policy itself. It'll raise around $700 million a year if it kicks in at about $150,000. Now, that's not nothing, but because it's only temporary, it won't address any of those structural issues of the budget. And they're the big issues that Australia has to deal with. David Coleman, do you concede that this is, as Peter Costello sees it, merely political to make it to show that the pain is being shared to the wealthy as well?
No, I don't. I think that given the situation, we have to look at a wide range of issues. And again, without preempting any outcomes of the budget, it's entirely appropriate that people are on a higher income, like myself, like Stephen, like others, make some contribution to what is a very serious situation that we face. So I think that it's completely appropriate that higher income earners make some contribution to the national challenge that we face.
Stephen Jones, what would you do to ensure that higher income earners are doing their bit in this budget, if not an increase to their income tax?
Well, I'd look at all income classes to start with, including the mining industry. The government has decided to remove the Minerals Resources Rent Tax, which was a growth tax, went up when mining profits were going up, down when mining profits were going down. They've denied themselves that source of revenue. So if they were so committed to ensuring that we were going to spread the burden, one of their first measures wouldn't have been to remove the MRRT. And interesting to note, the revenues that would be raised by the deceit tax and the mining tax, not that dissimilar. So if they're really committed to looking at structural problems, they'll move beyond what they're currently debating and look at a real thoroughgoing analysis of tax reform in this country. Can I make this point? And you dismiss it at the outcome, although it is important. It's not so much that this tax is built on a lie. It's the fact that it is built on the whole presumption that the government said it did not need to do it. The government went to the last election saying they could balance the budget without introducing new taxes, without cutting healthcare and without touching pensions. They are about to do exactly that in their first budget. So the worst thing is not it's a lie. The worst thing is that they went to an election saying that they could do something that they knew at the time they could not.
Well, I think, again,
David Coleman, do you believe that the coalition will eventually win out on this, that this will, when it comes into play, the lived experience won't be as bad as all of the hype, because that's what Julia Gillard thought with the carbon tax, and it didn't turn out so well for her?
Well, look, the overarching responsibility we have and the overarching commitment we have to the Australian people is to fix the budget mess. And unfortunately, you can't do that through measures that are easy. You can't do that through measures that don't have any impact on anyone in the community. And that is the criteria by which I think that people will look at the government and will say, did they take the right and hard decisions to address the huge fiscal problems that we face? And in the fullness of time, that is the test that people will put the government to. And I think that while there undoubtedly will be individuals in the individual measures in the budget that attract controversy, the budget will be a critical step in getting back on track in a fiscal sense, and that's what we were elected to do.
We also expect to see about $10 billion worth of infrastructure spending in the budget. According to Fairfax today, about $5 billion of that will go into a pool for bonuses for the states who sell off their assets and pump the proceeds into infrastructure. Stephen Jones, is that a concept Labor should support?
Look, Labor spent a lot of time and energy and resources over the last two terms in backfilling the infrastructure deficit that was left us by the Howard government, rebuilding over a third of the nation's freight rail network, record investments in urban transport infrastructure and in our national highway network. So, of course, we welcome sensible investment in infrastructure. Our concern with the two projects that are being invested in by the Commonwealth is this: they've had to rob money out of every other capital city in the country from their urban rail projects in Brisbane, in Adelaide, in Perth, in Hobart, to fund two big projects in Melbourne and Sydney that have not been through a cost-benefit analysis. So does Labor support the two projects, the WestConnex in particular here in Sydney? Well, yes, of course we do, but it should have been subject to a cost-benefit analysis, and that would have told you that if all you focus on is road, you will get the road built, but within 2 years it'll turn into a car park because you haven't got the rail and the other urban transport links sorted out at the same time.
David
you need to
Coleman,
do it in parallel, and they're not.
David Coleman, the Coalition is very keen on other issues, on seeing a cost-benefit analysis, the most famous being the NBN. Hammered Labor on that for years. Why not a cost-benefit analysis on some of these road projects?
Oh, look, I think the WestConnex project, which has a big impact on my electorate, is a fantastic initiative. Stephen and I are both from New South Wales, and the people from New South Wales, after 16 years of Labor, are very hungry for infrastructure to actually get built. And the initiatives we've announced today will mean that the WestConnex gets built quicker. And that's a great thing. It's 25 minutes faster journey to the city from my electorate, 40 minutes from further southwest. And obviously, as we go through the process, we're doing that in a very sensible and mature fashion. But, you know, infrastructure from the economic perspective is the gift that keeps on giving, because once you've got that infrastructure in place, you save travel time, not just today, not just tomorrow, but years into the future, and that has a great economic benefit right across the country.
The short answer is, if they did the cost-benefit analysis, every transport planner in the country would have said this is going to turn into a car park unless you do the rail system at the same time. That's why.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Stephen Jones, David Coleman, thank you both very much for your time. You can both go and have a cup of tea together there in the Sky News Centre after the break. Sarah.